Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have just an inspirational show coming right up. Our first guest today is Brad Warner, and he's here today to share with us his new book, It Came from Beyond Zen. Brad is an ordained Zen priest and also plays bass in a punk rock band. He's a filmmaker and blogger, and he's the founder of Angel City Zen Center in Los Angeles, and author of Hardcore Zen, Sit Down and Shut Up, and several other books about Zen Buddhism. So let's welcome to the show, Brad.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, fabulous. I got to tell you, I love your book cover. It makes me feel like Godzilla is going to come leaping out of it.
Well, that's great. I'm glad people like it. I've come up with almost all of the book cover ideas. I don't draw them myself, but I've hatched the ideas myself, and I'm always a little embarrassed because I feel like, who's going to buy a book with a big green tentacly monster on the cover? But people seem to like them, so I guess it's good.
Well, obviously your creativity is just in the flow, my goodness, because, look at this, it's like, well, this looks like an interesting book. It's not your ordinary Zen book like what people would sometimes consider. But, before we get started and kind of talking about that, why don't we talk a little bit about you first? What inspired you to follow this Zen path?
Well, I guess it just made sense to me. I started quite young. I was about 18 or 19 years old, and I was a punk rock bass player for this punk band called Zero Defects, hardcore punk in Ohio. Our main song was Drop the A-Bomb on Me. That was our hit. And the band was kind of going through some rough patches, and I had been attracted to the whole punk scene because I wanted to find something more real in the world. I was very concerned about finding something that was direct and honest and real, and I thought the punk scene was that for me at that age. And about the same time, I was a university student, and I took a class called Zen Buddhism without really knowing what Zen Buddhism was, except that it was something Japanese. I think I would have known that Buddha was an Indian at that point, but and then Zen was a Japanese version of an Indian religion. But then that's all I knew. And it just struck me as being eminently practical. Everything about it made perfect sense. It didn't matter what you believed. You didn't have to go anywhere else to do it. You could do it right in the privacy of your own home. You could do the Zazen practice. So it just made perfect sense, and that's what attracted me to it.
Well, and for our listeners that are new to this, because Zen gets thrown around a lot, and I don't think people really have a clear understanding of what that means.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, the word Zen is used so frequently. I have an Instagram account, and one of the things I like to do in Los Angeles is just take pictures of the various Zen things. There's a big billboard not too far from my house for a marijuana dispensary that's the Zen dispensary. There's everything is conflated with Zen. But what Zen really is it's a meditation system that was probably originated in India by the Buddha and was brought to China and then to Japan. And it's a really direct sort of meditation. So it's goalless. So you're not actually meditating to try to make anything happen, which I think to most people sounds a little crazy. But you're not trying to get enlightened or mindful or make yourself a better person or anything. You're actually engaged in the pure process of just sitting without any sort of aim in mind.
Mm-hmm. And it's not really wrapped up in dogma.
No, it's not, and that's what really attracted me to it, because I was not raised with any sort of religion. I'm one of those people that our family wasn't anti-religion. They just didn't really go to church or anything, or. So all I knew about our family is that we probably weren't Jewish or Catholic, which must have meant we were Protestant, but nobody ever went to a church. And I wanted something sort of spiritual in my life, but when I went and examined at least what was available in my area, this is like rural Ohio in the 70s and early 80s, it was all about belief, and you had to believe certain things, and God was going to punish you if you didn't and reward you if you did. And that just didn't make sense to me. But I felt that there was a spiritual aspect to my life. So I found this a really practical way to get into it, by just sitting and observing myself and seeing what's really there.
Well, and so when you started on this path, you really started to follow one particular Zen master's advice.
Well, yeah. Dogen was the foundation of all that. He's a guy who was a Japanese Zen monk, lived in the 1200s of the Common Era, and he started a movement that became very popular in Japan. What's interesting to me that's kind of related to my current book is that even though this movement that Dogen started in Japan became really widespread, the writings that Dogen left behind were largely neglected for hundreds of years. And he really wrote some amazing stuff about the practice and about philosophy and about life in general that I think is real useful. And I've been trying over the last couple of books I've done to bring some of that to light and make it more easily accessible for people who aren't East Asian religion studies majors.
Mm-hmm. Was it difficult to find some of his writings to just study, or was that something that was widely available at the time that you started to dive into it?
When I started to dive into it, no. There was one I was aware of. I think actually I found out there was a couple of others floating around, but there was one translation of his major work in English that I was aware of, and it wasn't that great. It's not a terrible translation, but it's not the best. Mm-hmm. And you mostly got it through kind of oral transmission, which is the way Buddhism has always worked. So I got it from my teacher, who was often paraphrasing things his teacher said. But when I went to Japan, I encountered the person who would ordain me, this guy named Gudo Nishijima, and he was working on a massive English translation of the entire book called Shobo Genzo, the Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, that Dogen wrote. And I started reading his translation, which is a much better one than the initial one. Nowadays, there's several good translations out there. Some are complete, not too many are complete, but there's several that are, include bits and pieces of his work that are really good. So it's not so hard. However, when you find those good translations, often what makes them good translations often ends up making them almost impossible for ordinary people to read, because they're trying to preserve the ancient Japanese language and nuances and all of this stuff. And what I've done in this book is I just don't worry about that. I just put it in my own words, because I figure there are several good translations available. If people want to look at those, they can. So I'm not misrepresenting what's in there, but I want to kind of filter it through a more contemporary perspective and kind of remove all the lofty intellectualizations that often accompany people who are studying ancient Japanese religious stuff.
So you made that sound really technical, I have to tell you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, but I like how your book was so very well written, and I appreciate your slant that you bring to it. It offers it's just kind of down to earth, and offers in some areas a little bit of humor that go along with just how to use this information in our daily lives, and I think sometimes when we look at text that's been written by people who are as esteemed as, Dogen, you look at it and you're like, wow, okay, I don't even understand if that's heads or tails, but you put it in a way that people are like, oh, okay, well, I get it now. And because you had a quote in there, it was something about, I just mess it up, that it talked about how he wasn't probably talking about McDonald's or Metallica,
Yeah. There's a lot of references in the book that if you're going to do a straight translation, you have to translate those references as they are. But they're references to things that people in Dogen's time, 800 years ago, would have been familiar with in Japan, right? But we don't know what they are. So one of the things I do is I try to find contemporary equivalents, and I think, McDonald's and Metallica, are just as good as some of the things that Dogen himself came up with, because he's just referencing ordinary things. He's not really, when we look at it, we're looking at it through a different cultural lens, and we see all this ancient Chinese philosophy and fairy stories and things being referenced. I mean, I don't mean fairy stories, but, cultural myths and things that, he'll make a reference to them, and everybody goes, oh, yeah, well, they get it. But we don't get it, and that becomes an extra layer of obfuscation, I suppose, if you want to use a 10-cent word there, that makes it hard for us to understand it. And I think, well, why? That doesn't even have to be there, because the idea is independent of all that, that cultural context. He's actually trying to say something universal. And if I can translate that into a 21st century American idiom, then I think that might be useful to people.
I think you've done a very good job doing that, and it's something that's relatable for all ages. It's not just like, hey, I study ancient texts. It's, very, very relatable to people who are looking for just a modern day good read.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's real interesting for me to do this work, because I'm looking at these. I approach it like a scholar would. I never got I got a bachelor's degree in history, so I didn't really have a lot of training in East Asian religious studies scholarship. But I learned from my teachers, and I just take all these weird arcane texts and spread them out in front of me and go, well, how am I going to translate this for a 14-year-old who is interested in philosophy and interested in meditation, but just doesn't have the patience. I hardly have the patience for some of this stuff that I have to read to prepare these books. Some of it's actually kind of ridiculous, the way academics will make things more difficult than they need to be. And I see that all the time in trying to translate this stuff into a modern, language.
Yeah, something that's usable for people nowadays. And, what's very interesting with your book, it came from Beyond Zen, excuse me, you make it so that, like, Westerners can really kind of step into a Zen practice without having to, feel like they're reading Dogen's original material.
Well, yeah, you can do that if you want to go look at the original material. It's there, and like I said, there's some really good English translations, but most of us don't have the patience for it. And I like being able to kind of put it. I don't think he wasn't talking generally to groups of scholars, especially he wasn't talking to modern religious scholars from America and Europe, who are the ones who are normally getting this from. And I think to kind of bring it back to the language that, in a way, it might have sounded to his contemporaries is kind of one of the things I have in mind. What it would have sounded like to just some peasant farmer who's standing around listening to it, and then translate that into a modern sort of idiom, I guess. I don't know if I'm even using the word idiom right.
That's okay. I do the same thing myself many times, so no worries. And so how did you come up with the title? Because obviously that's the first thing you see on this book besides the green monster, Yeah. The title is, there's an essay that I've been fond of ever since I first read it, and it's called Inmo in Japanese, which is Dogen using a Chinese word that just means it. And almost everyone who translates this essay chooses some kind of highfalutin word or this special Buddhist word like suchness or thusness, and it sounds really pretty. But he's really just saying it. And I love this essay because this it that he's describing is
it's about as close as you're going to get in that form of Buddhism to the idea of God. And a lot of people think that Buddhism is a philosophy without God. And it's true that we don't anthropomorphize, or we don't make God into this big white man on a throne with a giant beard and all that. But there is an idea that there is something profound within this universe that we are intimately connected to, and that our intelligence and our consciousness isn't just an accidental byproduct of evolution. It's a reflection of something real within the universe. The same way gravity and electromagnetism and all these other forces are real, then the force that we provisionally call consciousness is also a real thing, and it's a significant aspect of the universe that we are able to partake in and process in our own way as human beings. And if you add all of the consciousnesses in the universe up together, because they're all connected, well, it's something like acknowledging that God exists, although God then becomes something quite different, I think, from the way most of us conceive of God. And that's where the title, when I decided to do that essay, I decided, well, it came from Beyond Zen. That sounds funny. It's, I love those old movies where it came from outer space, or it came from beneath the sea, and all these things.
Well, is it part of your background? Didn't you used to work on some old movie stuff?
Oh, yeah. I spent about 15 years working, 10 in Japan and 5 more over here in Los Angeles, working for a company called Tsuburaya Productions, who were founded by the guy who basically invented Godzilla. Godzilla fans will debate about who exactly came up with Godzilla, but Eiji Tsuburaya, who founded the company I worked for, is usually the guy who's given the most credit, because he was the special effects director, so it was his job to figure out what Godzilla was going to be based on the script they handed him. And that's what the company did. He made Godzilla for another company, but then he formed his own company and just kind of kept churning out Godzilla-type stuff for years and years. In fact, they're still doing it.
And what a great experience that must have been, to be able to, be in that, and also as you're following your Zen path, Yeah,
that was what I did. I remember having this conversation with my teacher, because I was working at this job in this company, and I really liked it, because I really love that trashy stuff, And I said to him, "Do you think I should quit this job and become a full-time monk?" And he said, "No, you should not quit this job. You should keep this up." And at the time, I was kind of confused, like, why wouldn't I just become a monk instead and devote myself to meditation 24/7 and all this? Mm-hmm. But I can see the logic of his recommendation now, because having a foot in both worlds makes one better able to kind of communicate to others about this than might have happened if I'd just kind of gone up to the mountains and locked myself away for a few years.
Although I have to tell you, when I started my meditation practice, that actually sounds kind of nice.
Oh, it does. It really sounds great. Although the few times that I've done it, I haven't done it for years at a time, but I've done it for weeks at a time, where you just go into a monastic community and just stay there and never leave. Everything that happens in the regular world happens in a monastery too. There are little jealousies and weird relationships develop and stuff. So people kind of imagine that they'll go off to a monastery and kind of leave the regular world behind, but it's not quite that easy.
No such luck, because we're still human, and we still bring that drama factor with us regardless where we go. And you work on it, but it's there. Well, it's just a journey. What's interesting is, like, once you start on the path, it's always such a journey, to uncover, like, where you can push your own personal boundaries next, as opposed to pushing other people's buttons,
Yeah, it's true. And you find, I think, that you can push your own buttons better than anyone else. And once you kind of realize how you push your own buttons and how you can stop pushing your own buttons, then there's very little that somebody else can do that will ever bother you, because you've figured out how you bother yourself, and nobody can beat you in bothering yourself.
So well said. We need to put that on a plaque.
Yeah.
Well, as you were doing the research for this book, how long did it take you to do that?
Well, God, a lifetime. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. Yeah, because I lived in Japan and learned to speak and read and write Japanese. I'm not the master of the craft by any means, but I can do it. And that helped. That foundation really helped. And having a teacher who was very committed to translating Dogen into English really helped, because he could explain the concepts, and he'd worked with him for 60-odd years before I even met him. So he was well steeped in this stuff. That helped. But the actually writing it came from Beyond Zen took about a year to do. But really, you think about all the other years that went into it. It's a lot more than one.
Did you find something that was kind of surprising to you along your journey in doing your research on Dogen?
Well, yeah, it's interesting how, because I'm comparing, like one of the things I do, my normal way of working is I'll take as many translations in English that are available of a certain piece that Dogen wrote and read them all. And generally they'll more or less agree with each other, but every so often you come up with a passage where you've got 4 or 5 different translations, and they all say something completely different for a sentence or two. And so I'll go back and look at the original Japanese then and see what I'm dealing with. I actually go back to the original Japanese more frequently than that, but I'll look at that and I'll go, oh yeah, I see why these guys don't know, because I don't know what he's saying either, and
yeah.
And one of the luxuries I have in doing what I'm doing is that I can actually be upfront about that. It's kind of I can understand why a scholar would want to put up a front like they know what this stuff means, because you gotta keep the appearances up. Mm-hmm. But me, I don't have that sort of a reputation to protect, so I can just say, well, I have no idea what this sentence means, but I understand the sentence before it and the sentence after it, so I can make a guess, and I can tell the reader, well, here's my best guess at what this means. And I don't know, I would have found it useful if some of the stuff that I'd been presented with earlier had been able to just say that, just say, well, I don't know what this means, but it probably has something to do with,
Well, it really does take a lot of pressure off, because you're not so worried about having to make sure you get everything exactly, I guess, perfect, Can I say that, air quotations there, because, you're really taking it as a person who's kind of devoted to the practice, but not saying that you're an expert in it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what you got to be. One of the disappointments in working with some of these scholarly pieces about Dogen is finding out how so many of the scholars of his work don't actually do the practice. And I don't think you can understand Dogen's philosophy unless you're doing a meditation practice yourself, because it's all based on meditation practice. It would be like reading a book by a great baseball player as opposed to somebody who watched a lot of baseball. It's a different sort of thing when you're actually involved in it.
Yeah, or someone actually out in the field doing baseball, kind of like,
yeah.
You'd be that person out there doing it. I can understand why that would be a little frustrating to kind of, because it doesn't carry the same perspective.
No, it doesn't at all. And sometimes I won't name names, but I was just reading an article recently where the scholar I felt he went totally the wrong way, and come to find out he doesn't have a meditation practice, and this is why he doesn't understand what Dogen is saying in this one, passage because he just doesn't know what it's referring to. But anybody who's actually practiced can recognize what he's referring to, that kind of thing.
Well, hopefully he has an anger management practice going on then instead. So it was a joke.
Well, I think anger management is part of it, though.
Well, it all helps. So, you've got some very colorful chapters here, and one of them is kind of funny. It's don't be half-assed. So why don't you share with our listeners what that's all about?
Well, Dogen wrote one of the most obscure and very nearly lost to history pieces that Dogen wrote is called Instructions for the Cook. And probably, I would imagine that the original people who were tasked with preserving his work just saw this thing called Instructions for the Cook and thought, well, this is not one of his important pieces, so we'll leave this one to later. Luckily, it was preserved. It's ostensibly just a set of instructions for how the cook at a Zen monastery should behave or should do the work of cooking. But if you read it, it's really actually about how to live your life. One guy wrote a book on it called How to Cook Your Life, which I think is a good title. Don't be half-assed, though, is my kind of distillation of what he's saying. Dogen was looking at these monasteries that had been established in Japan, and they were a relatively new thing at the time in Japan. They'd existed, Zen monasteries had existed in China for hundreds of years, but hadn't existed that long in Japan. And usually the cook was they kind of gave the job to some lackey who would just put some stuff together and throw it on the table for everybody to eat, kind of like an army cook or something maybe. But he said that cooking was actually significant work and that we should take it very seriously. And he kind of goes into how to take the work of cooking very seriously. And you can extrapolate from that to saying, well, maybe I should take my job just as seriously as he's saying to take this job of cooking for monks. Maybe I should look at my life and just go, okay, maybe I shouldn't be so half-assed. Maybe if I pay attention. And one of the things I think is one of his main messages is just we spend a lot of our lives kind of fast-forwarding through it, or we feel like we are, and we're not all there when we're waiting for the bus or when you're waiting for the water to boil for the noodles to be cooked or whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're kind of off somewhere else. But he says stay there, stay with that activity, even if it seems kind of mindless or boring or repetitive. Stay with it because that's your life. That at that moment your life is stirring the noodles. So if you do it in a kind of a inattentive or just this way that you're just kind of off in the clouds while you're doing it, you're actually missing your life, which is a terrible shame.
Well, what a great point too, because with when we look at our mindful practice, it really is about living in the moment. And it's so easy, especially nowadays, for people to be so distracted with everything else.
Oh God, yeah. You got your phone ready to give you the latest update on some celebrity scandal, and 24/7, and yeah, there's a real temptation, and even I resisted getting an iPhone for years until there was just until you had to get one, and I have to resist that temptation myself. I just spent a month in Europe, and it was great because I didn't have a data plan that would allow me to look at my phone when I was just randomly waiting around for something, and you notice so much more of your life, and I think it's good to kind of disconnect from that stuff.
Oh my gosh, you must have had so much time to do other things, because it really can be such a time suck, Yeah,
and you don't really miss anything when you go back to it and look. You're like,
world's still here,
Yeah.
Well, so Brad, what do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I don't know. I think it'd be good if more people looked into doing meditation practice and got into that. I think I've started to think that meditation isn't sort of optional. I think in the future, we'll probably look back on the earlier era of human life the way we look back on the era when before people brushed their teeth. We'll be like, oh my God, how do these people even live without brushing their teeth? Well, I think meditation is just as necessary, and I think we'll learn that eventually as a society and as a whole. So, and I'm trying to help that along a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a perfect analogy because we probably will look back and some things do tend to be a little barbaric looking, going, gosh, they didn't do this before. How they managed.
Yeah, there's so many things, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, well, Brad, thank you so much for, and real quick, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Oh, right, I always forget that. Hardcorezen.info is my blog, and that's sort of ground zero or central station or whatever, maybe a better metaphor for everything else that I do. So I link up to any live appearances I'm doing or new books, and I try to keep the blog updated several times a week, as much as I can.
Well, and I know you have a lovely array of T-shirts there too, aside from the book that they can go ahead and get.
Yeah,
totally cool.
They're available as well. Thank you.
Hey, well, it's not every day we get to talk to a punk rocker monk, so this is pretty cool. Thank you. And thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your book with us today, Brad. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you.
That's very nice. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to AnswersUnleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
The highly acclaimed and newly released book, The Hand Part 2 by Lynn Van Praagh Grattan, describes the journey between a psychic medium and a family who lost a son. Messages from Beyond Eternity's Gate is of love and healing. For more information, visit www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com. That's www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted to be introducing our next guest, Dr. Ira-Israel, and he's here today to talk to us about his new book, How to Survive Your Childhood, Now You're an Adult. Now, Dr. Ira is a licensed professional clinical counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and mindful relationship coach. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with degrees in psychology, philosophy, and religious studies. Dr. Ira has taught mindfulness to thousands of physicians, psychologists, attorneys, engineers, and creative professionals across the U.S. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Ira.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It's lovely to be here.
It is such a pleasure to have you here. My goodness, your book is so well received. I know, actually, it was just shown to me that it's a #1 new release, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's been a great honor to just to have so many lovely people read it and make notes and say nice things about it.
Well, and I think a lot of people resonate with this because who doesn't have childhood baggage in one shape or another? Some of them kind of drive the bus, and the other was, sometimes the others take a back seat.
Right. And I was going to say, I thought you were going to go to the, and sometimes they throw you under the bus.
That could happen too. So when you started on this path, I know you had an experience that kind of really has driven you towards mindfulness and kind of finding out more about what life's all about.
Well, my path could best be described as non-discursive or flying by the seat of my pants for 25 years, but it got me where I am today. As you mentioned a minute ago, there was a car accident when I was 18 years old, and after surgeries for 2 years, I just started asking those existential questions. What's the meaning of life? Why am I here? What should I be doing with my life? And I started studying philosophy, which led me to live in Paris for some time after graduate school, and just study all the most recent developments in terms of consciousness from that particular angle. And then after about 8 years, I was in Thailand, and I got hurt, and a woman healed me with her hand. And then I ended up studying Buddhism, Hinduism, Kabbalah, parapsychology, yoga, meditation. And then about 8 years later, I got into a relationship that was combustible, I will say, and that got me studying psychology. So the interesting thing for me is that during those 25 years, if you had looked at me getting master's degrees in Buddhism or philosophy or studying the things that I was studying in different places, you would have thought, he's a lost soul. He's just, doing his thing. And then one day in 2008, I was teaching in Rodney's yoga studio in Piedmont, Oakland, California, and a woman came into a class, and I watched her hand go down on the mat and her back open up, and I heard a voice say, it's time to start putting this all together in some sort of framework. So I started making DVDs. I made yoga for depression and anxiety, and then mindfulness for depression, mindfulness for anxiety, beginner's guide to mindfulness meditation, a beginner's guide to happiness. And I've been teaching at Esalen, and now I have the book. So I always like to use that example because sometimes you just have to go with your gut. And, if your gut says, go to Berlin and look at that painting, you might not know why your gut is telling you to do that, but 5 or 10 years down the line, it might make sense. And that's what happened to me.
It's really interesting when we have these life-changing events that happen, and at 18 having a major car accident. I mean, those are kind of some years where people would have a very difficult time with having anything happen with them. But as we go through life and we have these things that happen to us, they end up being catalysts that create the future that we're going to have.
Right. And then when we look back on it, one of the things about owning your life, and, I discuss our mind's propensity to create woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't, and those resentments which manifest now as our own suffering. So the only way to get rid of them is to fully own every moment that made you who you are today. So it's not the easiest thing in the world, but really that's the end of what I've learned through studying philosophy and psychology, and in particular or in particular Buddhism. If you want to alleviate your own suffering, and I believe that Buddhism is not a religion; it's a prescription to alleviate suffering. And if you want to do that, then you have to learn how to be as authentic as possible, including being in the present moment and not listening to all the prejudices and defense mechanisms that your mind created in order to survive your childhood.
Well, and so you brought up the word, so we're going to touch on it because a lot of, being authentic gets tossed around a lot. And I think people have some confusion sometimes when it comes to, the meaning of it and what does it mean to be authentic?
Right. This is fascinating to me. So that is, what is authenticity? First three words of the book, really, because there is so much confusion and there's so many different ways of looking at it. And I hope that the first chapter of my book is hysterical. I hope it ends up as a off-Broadway play, because it is insane to me how people use, or they try to couch something that they really shouldn't be saying under the guise of authenticity. So we have to deconstruct what it means to be authentic. And my conclusion is that, because I don't want to ruin it for readers, my conclusion is basically that authenticity is damn near impossible because language is a cage and we construct reality within these cages. So there's a paradox here, because I kind of tease throughout the first chapter that psychologically and all the things that we think we're doing when we're authentically, eating correctly, or we're authentically communicating with our partners or things like that, that's all great and we have to do that. But really, we should kind of think of it in terms of what are the prejudices and the things going on from the past that are influencing and when I say the word influencing, what I really mean is hindering. Hindering us from being totally present in the present moment, and then not also, casting our nets into the future to try to stave off potential traumas. So again, presence and being able to just live moment by moment and then assimilate however they are as negative experiences. Oh, this is a really negative experience. This too shall pass. Or, wow, this is amazing. I'm having the best birthday of my life, and this too shall pass. So, everything's ephemeral, and we just have to learn how to be as present as possible.
And I think that's kind of the caveat, is just being present and being in that moment. Because a lot of times when we realize, and how you're talking about, good times, bad times, those will pass, being in the present, we can actually, be able to just be present for all the miracles that are coming. And it could be something, something simple.
Right.
So,
well, we all have selective listening, and in the book I talk about how, and this is a part of attachment theory. In the first 18 months of our lives, I believe we develop overall theories of how the universe is operating, including whether the universe is abundant, or if you have to be suspicious of everybody, or because they might hurt you or betray you or abandon you. So we have these theories of how the universe is out there, and then for the next 70 years, we find facts that rise to meet our theories. And what I'm saying is, lean in to some discomfort, test your comfort zone and see is really, if you can show up in a vulnerable way that your mind says, no, if I show up like that, if I tell this person I'm sorry, they're going to think I'm weak and they're going to run all over me. Lean in, be vulnerable, say you're sorry.
That, and I agree with you. I mean, that talk is so 1930s. I mean, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be out there and showing people that, hey, we've got strong sides, but we also have sides that we can, show compassion and caring for other people. It doesn't all have to look a certain way.
I think that will be the next society after we watch our society implode or whatever terrible things might happen in the next 100 years. And I believe that it's been ushered in by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who says, "My religion is compassion." And that's the one thing that we really need to lean into. It doesn't matter. All these 1%ers cannot eat any better. Their kids are not going to go to any better schools, but it's time to learn how, it's not a zero-sum game, and that we all have to prosper together and live together, as a system, all human beings in harmony with the earth.
Well, and that harmony, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert on this, really starts within ourselves, and then distinguishing like some of this, because in your book you talk about this, some of this negative chatter that goes on, and really determining who's doing the talking, which I thought was a really good point. Most people don't even think about that.
There's a beautiful phrase by Jacques Lacan who says, "Language thinks me." So I asked very early in the book, could you have thoughts without language? I mean, my cat gets around perfectly, knows when to eat, knows where to go to the bathroom, knows everything, and does not have that self-reflectiveness. Oh, do I look good today? I think I put on a little weight. She doesn't have that thing that humans do, worrying about their mortgages, worrying about their car payments, worrying if their kids are all right, who's sending them emails now, things like that. And we have this gift of consciousness, but the way it's evolved, it really seems more like a curse sometimes. And so what I go into is, how could this have happened? How could consciousness, this immense gift, have turned so detrimental in such a short period of time? And I look at our educational system and the way that we raise children in our culture, because no baby was born with a voice in its head that says, "I suck at this, I'll never be happy, I'm unlovable, nobody likes me, I might as well kill myself." No baby was ever born with negative thoughts. But if you look at how we raise children in our society, and I say provocatively, I believe that we raise children the same way that we tame pets, and that is through negative languaging. Don't run out into the street. Don't jab your sister with the fork. Don't do this. And then teenagers, don't have sex. Don't do drugs. Don't do this. Don't. And the people assimilate this language as there's something wrong with me. That's what I believe the origin of negative self-talk is, and low self-esteem. It's because children want to eat when they're hungry and sleep when they're tired and poop when they have to poop and play when they're playful. And, we put them onto these 45-minute block schedules of now is playtime, now is sleep time, now is feeding time, now is, and that I really think that we should start examining the unintended ramifications of our educational system.
I think the educational system isn't really there for all the geniuses that children have, that don't fall within the realm of what they would be considering, hey, if you really understand math very well, but maybe you're artistic with computers in a different way, they just don't really consider the genius that children have.
Well, I find an analogy with our voting system. I'll make a provocative claim in class sometimes, and I'll say, I'll know I live in a democracy when every American votes via their telephone. The chat system and the way we vote in America now, it's about 250 years old. It's antiquated. It's outdated, and it doesn't allow us to thrive. The same thing. Our educational system is about 250 years old, and again, it's made to produce workers. It's not made to make creative geniuses. It hasn't evolved. We still study the same, math, history, biology, things like that, and it's basically just designed to make workers. And, what are they doing in Finland now? Well, I forget what it's called. There's a minimum, everybody in the state gets everyone in the country gets a certain amount of money, and you can choose what to do with that. What's that called? Minimum?
Yeah, it's a living, they get it's like a living expense that they get.
Right.
They don't have to worry about paying for their house, mortgage or rent or their cars, and simple basic expense.
And the problem and why that won't go over so easily in America is because what's happened in the past 50, 60 years is that Americans, I believe, tend to get their personal identity through their jobs. I mean, I always make the joke when two guys meet at a bar, they ask, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? And this thing, what do you do? How do you earn money, work? It's become, in the forefront of our consciousness in some ways. And, people used to work to live, meaning that you work for 8 hours and then the other 8 hours a day, you go to the opera, take a run, go to hiking with your kids, play board games, do something. But most of the people I know, we work about 80, 100 hours a week. We're lucky if we can squeeze in 2 yoga classes. And I don't even walk to cafes anymore. I make coffee in the house. It's like we're really the competition in late capitalism and the way we understand who we are. Nobody wants to be called a slacker. So everyone is, I ask people all the time, how are you? How are you? How are you? How are you feeling? And the answer 50, 60% of the time is I'm crazy busy. And that makes no sense. There's no correlation between how you are feeling and what you're filling up your time on earth doing, So it's fascinating the way we've all become addicted to busyness.
Oh, without a doubt. And, it's interesting because we're the most connected and yet the most disconnected society.
Exactly. Well, what I say is that the Internet deludes us into thinking that we're connecting, but mirror neurons do not fire via text message. Mm-hmm. So we really, there's a line in the book, 1 hug equals 1 million Facebook likes. The kids today, the millennials, walking around, seeing how many people clicked on this this Snapchat or whatever app it's on. They still go home and they're lonely, and it manifests as eventually as depression.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, and on that topic, so what is it that people are really looking for? What's that one thing?
Well, we're having a total re-envisioning of our society. All the studies on happiness say basically in my part of the world, after $80,000, happiness it levels off. So instead of wanting to impress your friends with the conspicuous consumption, a large bank account, exotic vacations, we need to learn how to connect and go back to a simpler let's throw a frisbee around, or let's break bread and have meals and make time to really just be with each other and not have our heads buried in our devices, because we really need to learn loving, compassionate communication skills where we're really attuned to another person. That's what we need to do.
Well, it's interesting. You'll probably have some people ask what a frisbee is, because, most people are not getting outside anymore. What's a frisbee? Why would we do that? Why would we just throw that around? But it's the process of being outside and being connected with other people in a way that isn't, so much connected with your phone or your device, I would think.
Right. And the other thing is, I find personally video games, the last one I played was called Atari, and I think I was 12. I played a Pac-Man game once, but I find them oppressively boring. There's nothing remotely interesting, no matter, even if there's naked women and things exploding. I just look at that and I'm like, I can't understand how any human being finds that compelling at all. So I'm very lucky that, walking down the street and meeting another person and shaking hands and having coffee and talking about something we read in the New York Times, that to me is thrilling and exciting. But sitting in front of a box with lights going off is it's torture.
Hey, we pretty much grew up in the same era. I know what you're talking about. It is a different way of being. I mean, with me, it was more get outside, play, run around, do things, meet people. And, it's a different era that we live in where, young people are connected in such a way that they probably have never experienced some of that. So, I know in your book you talk about like healthy ways that people can kind of blow off steam if they're feeling frustrated or like things aren't working out.
Well, we all have a range of happiness, and there are activities that keep people, this is scientifically proven, drinking a bottle of gin for breakfast will keep you at the low end of your happiness range. Mouthing off to police officers, all those things, we know what keeps us at the low end of our happiness ranges. Mm-hmm. Yoga, meditation, eating healthy meals and not too much, 1 glass of wine, not 4. Those things keep us at the high end of our happiness ranges. So for every human being, we're living at an incredible time in humanity because we have so much freedom, so many privileges, so many luxuries that we can decide who we want to be and what types of lives we want to lead, and then use tools to be those people and to have these incredibly wonderful lives if we know how to construct them. On the other hand, Sartre has this phrase, man is confronted by his freedom. So sometimes this freedom is oppressive, and we're plagued by the plethora of possibilities. Like we just have too many choices, and that renders us paralyzed. I'm sorry for all the alliteration, but anyways. We have to be proactive. We have to learn. We have to go out there and find out that, I need to run. I need to run a couple of times a week. I need to do yoga. I love movies. I like going to jazz concerts. I like going to the symphony. And I found a bunch of things that really make me grow and learn and evolve. So I always want to keep learning, and I've also found a way to contribute to society by writing and teaching and things like that, and that's really fulfilling. So every person has to, what I think is a midlife crisis is what happens when a lot of people attain their goals that are not happy, meaning we were sold this bill of goods. If you went to a good school, you would get a good job. If you got a good job, you find a great partner or spouse. You'd have 2.3 kids. You'd drive a Subaru station wagon. You would have the sports car. On weekends, you would do something. And most of my peers have attained these goals, and they weren't happy. So what I find to be a midlife crisis is a questioning of, what we consider to be the American dream, because happiness is not really a part of that. And we have to actually be proactive and find out the things that do make us happy, because earning money does not correlate strongly with happiness, but intimate, loving connections with human beings does.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. When I worked in the corporate world, I had $1 million business. Was awarded all the accolades that, as a company they would give. And it was interesting. You get to a certain point where you're like, okay, I've done it. I've accomplished this. Now what? Because it wasn't a fulfilling thing. And it's interesting because, you can, I personally made the decisions okay, well, I'm going to shoot for, quality versus quantity. And go in that direction instead. And, there's something to be said for having a happy life. Money can't buy happiness in many ways.
And also, we have a very limited time on this earth. We never know what's going to happen. And to, make that commitment to working until 65, we should find our vocations. That's the most important thing. You find, what are you called to do? Are you called to paint? Are you called to teach? Are you called to run? Are you called to swim? Are you called to dance? Are you called to follow your bliss? Find the things that make you happy, because what you were told makes people happy in our generation of having a big bank account. It just nobody wanted to say wealthiest person in this cemetery on their tombstone. That's absurd. You want to say beloved. You want to say, loving son, loving father, loving sister, loving husband, loving brother. So we need courses in our educational system like how to love more people. You don't have to take chemistry. You should be taking classes like how to hug somebody or something like that. It's just astonishing to me, the things that we assume are learned growing up in America that are really not learned. And then, I'll just go off on a tangent here, but I also work with a lot of young adults, and the influence of, let's say, pornography on what they think is a viable relationship is awful. It's heinous, and we're hopefully there'll be a shift in our society so that we realize that there's no love in the things that people are watching.
Well, I think it's because people have been so disconnected for a while in relationships that they're not really understanding what it takes to have a loving relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to look at all the power dynamics, and then, we're seeing this incredible shift in gender roles, and we're also seeing, the white male hegemony, the patriarchy. The conservatives are trying to conserve their power on a grand scheme. So because they've enjoyed, slavery and enjoyed all the terrible things that white male hegemony has been privileged to do over the past 1,000 years, and we're birthing a new compassionate society where men and women are equal, and all the races are mixed together. There's not a hierarchy. And, again, there's people who have enjoyed power who are reluctant to give it up. Those people are called conservatives. And then there's progressives, people who see, hey, we all have to live together, and let's progress into the next society as smoothly as possible.
So, I know you help thousands of people, make shifts and just change their lives in such a positive way. What would you say is some of the number one reasons that people reach out to you?
Well, people reach out to me because they're suffering from depression or anxiety a lot of the times, or their relationships are not thriving. And I go back to looking at people's tools. There's that beautiful quote by Abraham Maslow who says, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem resembles a nail. So my only job is to help people enlargen their toolboxes, which means raising consciousness about our own ways of being in the world, what we think is normal, and then to try to employ new tools so that we can get the type of love that we want. Because I believe as sentient beings, our number one desire is to be loved unconditionally. And then we grew up in this society, this very competitive society, which only gave us tools to gain love conditionally because we're smart, we're rich, we dress well, we're good in bed, we drive the right car, all of these things. I mean, in particular, I can go do a whole session if you want on the semiotics of internet dating, because it's fascinating to me. I've heard that all guys show like six-pack abs. I don't even know what those are. I think mine is just a one-pack. And then all women, like all the yoga teachers, show themselves on Machu Picchu or jumping out of an airplane, or they just show this like things like, why, if you're looking for your life partner, like, do you, at the end of the day, are you going to say, shot a tiger? Like, well, why are you putting these things on your, as your first photo to try to attract like your life partner? It's like someone hasn't explained to our generation like how to engage with other people in a way to get the love that you want. Like all these things are shooting out these signals like, admire me, admire me, admire me, admire me, I'm rich, admire me, I'm a great athlete, admire me. But you don't want to be admired, you want to be loved. So we have to make a radical shift in our way of being from, seducing everyone into liking our false selves, our outer shells, and really, feeling comfortable with who we are, and then connecting with people who are also authentic. So that was a long way to answer your question. People normally come to me for depression, anxiety, or relationship issues or career issues, but it all comes down to the same questions, like who am I, what am I doing on planet Earth, and how can I be happier?
So, it's interesting. We all look for the same things, and you're so right. Your book is, so on target. I felt that it had such great information for people who are looking to make those kind of shifts in their lives and just gain more information. Where can people connect with you and be part of your community, Ira?
Well, www.ira-israel.com has 2 free videos of my classes, and then Amazon Prime has all my DVDs for free. The book is out there, and I'm doing classes around Los Angeles, and I teach at the Esalen Institute. We just came back from an amazing week, and I have a weekend coming up in February. So any place that invites me to come do a little talk is lovely. I prefer to also have meals. Like I just did something at Diesel Books, and then everyone went to dinner afterwards. And then that's what thrills me, like really connecting with people, one-on-one afterwards. So giving a little lecture on my understanding of philosophy and psychology. And then, people coming up and say, oh, I agree with this, I disagree with this, or this is what I'm going through. So, through my website, I do Skype sessions, and I have an office here in Santa Monica, so I'm totally available.
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time to be on the show with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Marianne. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.